Normal looking photos that have a disturbing backstory, Part 7. Blanche Monnier was a free woman until she began dating a man that her mother didn't approve of. To maintain control of Blanche, she chained her to this bed for 25 years and nearly starved her to death. This painting of a dog looking into a gramophone is titled His Master's Voice, and it's based off the painter inheriting his brother's dog, and the brother had just passed away. He noticed that the dog became intrigued when he played recordings of his brother's voice. This photo shows John Lennon signing a copy of his latest album, Double Fantasy for a fan. The man on his right was his killer. This photo was taken by two girls out for a walk on the Monon High Bridge in Indiana. They were both found dead the following day. The man in this photo was presumed to be their killer, but he was never found. These teeth were removed from the side of a denture clinic in Nova Scotia. The owner of this place killed 22 people in the worst mass shooting in Canadian history. Normal looking photos that have a disturbing backstory, Part 8. This shadow is permanently etched on the steps of Hiroshima following the nuclear explosion that killed over 70,000 people. The boy in this photo is Estevan Reiner. The Nazis who took his photo made him put this uniform on, smile for the picture, and knew exactly what his fate would be. 2 weeks later, he was killed in a gas chamber. A similar story for this girl whose photo was just taken by a Nazi photographer after Germany had just invaded Poland. You can tell by her smile that she had no idea what was to come. This photo shows three young girls smiling together for a selfie. On the right hand side of the photo, you can see a light which is the headlight of a train which hits them moments later. While this photo appears to be just an ordinary large class photo, the two boys at the top left are responsible for the Columbine High School shooting, which at the time was the worst high school shooting in American history and killed 12 students and 1 teacher. Normal looking photos that have a disturbing backstory, Part 9. While some people may find clowns frightening, they're still normal. This photo shows John Wayne Gacy, or Pogo the Clown, who was a convicted serial killer and rapist in the 1970s. Gacy was convicted of sexually assaulting and murdering over 30 boys and became known as the Killer Clown. This security cam shows two 10-year-old boys abducting 3-year-old James Berger in a mall in England. The two boys took him on a 2.5-mile walk and tortured him in ways that I will not mention, leaving his body on a railroad track. This photo was found on a damaged camera that had gone through the washing machine at the home of Travis Alexander. His girlfriend held him at gunpoint and then shot him to death after the photo was taken. She took many other photos. This girl is Tereska, who grew up in a Nazi concentration camp and lived in a home for disturbed children after World War II. When asked to draw what home looks like, she drew this sporadic tunnel of lines. Normal looking photos that have a disturbing backstory, Part 10. Ronaldo Dogsa, a politician in the Philippines, took a picture of his family right before he was assassinated on New Year's Day in 2011. The man in the back shot him twice while his family was forced to watch. The man holding the puppy is Yukio Araki, a kamikaze pilot who just 1 day later would crash into the USS Brian, killing 66 of the crew members and taking his own life. Yukio was only 17 years old, knowing completely well that he'd be going to his death the next day. The smiling man in this photo is Nazi Joseph Goebbels, who is in a 1933 League of Nations meeting, and in the next photo, his expression completely changes. His expression changes from cheerful to hatred because someone told him that the photographer was of Jewish descent. This seemingly normal photo shows 3 men in judo attire. The man on the right, however, is Osama bin Laden, the terrorist responsible for the 9/11 attacks on New York City. Normal looking photos that have a disturbing backstory, Part 11. The girl wearing the veil is Elizabeth Smart, who was kidnapped for 9 months by the man on the far right. This photo was taken at a party the kidnapper crashed with Elizabeth, and she was forced to wear this veil at all times to keep her from being recognized in public. While this photo may seem like a bunch of astronauts hanging out at the pool and having a great time, it's actually the crew of Apollo 1. They died inside the capsule on the left, unable to escape the fire. This is Chernobyl Elephant's Foot, a massive radiation from the reactor core meltdown. If you hang around it for too long, it becomes deadly, but not nearly as much as in 1986. It's so deadly that they had to use a set of mirrors to take this photograph. This photo was just taken after LBJ became president following the assassination of John F. Kennedy. In the front, you'll see Jackie Kennedy grieving her husband's death. LBJ turned toward his lifelong friend, Texas Congressman Albert Thomas, who gave him a wink and a smile. Normal looking photos that have a disturbing backstory, Part 12. How about an entire documentary? Errol Morris is a great documentary maker that can capture people extremely well. This documentary is a great look at a small town in rural Florida called Vernon. The film doesn't really have a narrative, it's just made up of interviews with some of the colorful and quirky characters in their rather mundane small town. And just based on that, it's a pretty good documentary to watch. Funny, simple, touching at times. However, this was not the film Errol Morris set out to make. The original name of the documentary was Nub City. At the time, Vernon, Florida had the highest rate of limb amputation per capita. The messed up part is that people were actually cutting off their fingers, hands, and feet to collect the insurance money. While filming the documentary, Errol Morris actually received death threats from the citizens, thinking he was going to expose their secrets. He then re-edited the whole film to where it never mentions a thing about the amputations. Normal looking photos that have a disturbing backstory, Part 13. A group of students in India went swimming and took selfies in the water before they left. They later noticed that one of the boys was missing and discovered the top of his head in the background of one of their photos. They contacted the police, who found his dead body floating in the pond. This photo shows a starving little girl trying to reach a feeding center when a vulture landed nearby her, waiting for her to die. The photographer, Kevin, was told not to touch any of the children out of fear of getting a disease. In the Victorian era, families used to dress up their dead relatives and take pictures with them. You can see that the image of the mom and the dad is blurry because they had to wait for the camera shutter to cycle, but the daughter's photo is perfectly clear. The man in this photo is Nasala. He hadn't met his rubber quota for the day, so his bosses cut off his daughter's wife and hand, and then they killed his daughter and wife and then cannibalized them. This photo shows Nasala being forced to stare at his 5-year-old daughter's chopped off hand and foot. Normal looking photos that have a disturbing backstory, Part 14. This photo shows Jesse McBain and his girlfriend Patricia Mann on their way to a Valentine's Day dance. When they failed to return to their dorms, their roommates called the police, who found their bodies tied up in the woods 3 days later. They had been tortured and died side by side. What seems like a cheerful teenager is actually 17-year-old Jeff Franklin, who had just used a hatchet and a sledgehammer to murder both of his parents and injure several of his siblings in 1998. In 1904, 24-year-old O.C. was giving birth in her mother's home. Her mother actually hated her and drugged O.C. on morphine and forced her to stay in bed. She then administered a lethal overdose and told doctors that she had died in childbirth to collect the insurance money, worth over $850,000. This photo shows police carrying serial killer and cannibal Jeffrey Dahmer's refrigerator into a van. Dahmer killed and cut up over 17 boys, and you can tell the police are quite disturbed by what's in the fridge. Normal looking photos that have a disturbing backstory, Part 15. When this Swedish teen showed up to school one day dressed as Darth Vader, his classmates naturally wanted to take photos with him, thinking it was an early Halloween costume. However, in a haunting twist, he used a sword to kill a teacher and a student, injuring many others. In 1995, at the age of 61, American artist William Uttermohlen was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. In response to his illness, the artist painted a series of self-portraits, and you can see from these photos how quickly his mind deteriorated. While this photo appears to be of a damaged rustic wall, it's actually from inside of a concentration camp gas chamber, with walls covered in nail marks from victims trying to escape their doom. These aren't decorations or birdhouses. Pictured here is an Indonesian Torajan tree grave for babies. Once a baby dies, its body is buried inside the trunk of a living plant so it can be absorbed by nature. Normal looking photos that have a disturbing backstory, Part 16. The man dressed as Santa Claus is Bruce MacArthur. Over 7 years, he would lure men through a dating app, murder them, and spread their remains in planters boxes. This painting, called Christina's World, seems like a normal girl laying in the grass. However, Christina suffered from a debilitating disease that left her unable to walk, so she crawled everywhere and lived a pretty grim life. This photo shows a prisoner of war returning from Vietnam being greeted by his wife and kids. However, the day he was released, the wife sent him a Dear John letter, meaning that she had found another man while he was in prison. Alan Harubi, a freshman at the University of Oklahoma, murdered his entire family in 2014. The next day, he drove down to Dallas for an OU Texas football game, where he took this picture in a hotel room with his friend. It can be assumed from this Instagram post that he was trying to hide his identity. However, he quickly confessed and received multiple life sentences. Normal looking photos that have a disturbing backstory, Part 17. This is YouTuber Sarah Funk, who was vlogging her trip to Cyprus's Red Lake. The suitcase in the water was actually discovered to contain the body of a 12-year-old girl who was murdered by a serial killer. At $1.5 million, this is one of the most valuable violins in the world. The initials WH stand for Wallace Hartley, who was the lead violinist aboard the Titanic. This was the instrument he played the night the ship sank before Wallace himself died. This is Jimmy Savile, a famous DJ who was even knighted by the Queen of England. However, he was a pedophile who raped over 300 children at the hospitals he ran, and he even raped their dead bodies. A couple was staying at an underwater cabin at the Manta Resort. This photo shows Steven proposing to his girlfriend through the cabin window. She said yes, but when she waited for her fiancé to return, he never made it out of the water and drowned. Normal looking photos that have a disturbing backstory, Part 18. The girl in this photo was arrested for torturing and killing animals. She filmed herself doing it and even posted it online. She hanged her dogs by their collars, nailed them to walls, and even shot them with an airsoft gun. She would then cut them open and rip out their internal organs. This sweet looking little girl is Jeannie, also known as the Wild Child, who spent the first 13 years of her life chained to a chair, and this photo was taken moments after she'd just been rescued. This normal looking scenic painting features the ocean with the night sky. However, it was painted by Adolf Hitler, whose dream in life was to become an artist. However, he failed the entrance exam to art school and ultimately gave up. These pieces of yarn in a first grade classroom are the trajectories of the bullets fired by the Sandy Hook shooter in 2012, who killed 20 children and 6 adults. The reason that the angles are pointing downward is quite disturbing when you think about it. Normal looking photos that have a disturbing backstory, Part 19. This photo of Richard Hickok and Perry Smith shows 2 murders after hearing that they've been sentenced to death. They murdered a family of 4 and planned to rob them, but they found nothing worth stealing except for a mere $50. The girl on the left is wearing a wire. The girl on the right has no idea. Together they stabbed one of their friends to death, and the girl on the left confessed to the police and is now cooperating with them. Besides the pixelation, this looks like a couple getting married surrounded by their loved ones. However, all the children in this photo were horribly physically and mentally abused until a couple of them managed to escape. The man in this photo was actually on a first date with another woman. When he heard that Japan had surrendered, he left his date, got drunk, and walked into Times Square and grabbed the first nurse he saw and kissed her. He ended up actually marrying the girl he went on the first date with, and she has no problems with this at all. However, she says that in all these years, George never kissed me like that. Creepy historical photos that will haunt your nightmares, Part 1. During World War II, Finland defenders often took Russian soldiers that were frozen to death and placed them upright as a means of psychological warfare. Katarina Ditzel was a mental patient in the early 1900s. She made a life-size doll out of straw which she would pummel when she was upset and dance with when she was happy. This doll gave her the love she needed when she was in the institution. In 1925, the Madame Tussauds Wax Museum in London suffered from a fire where many of the mannequins melted or otherwise were damaged. If you look at vintage Halloween costumes, they were all homemade and each was made to scare the living daylights out of people. Hell no. I don't know why this one's scary, but I'm not sleeping tonight. Normal looking photos that have a disturbing backstory, Part 20. This photograph was taken by Rodney Alcala, the dating game murderer. No one knows who this woman is, not even Rodney. He killed over 130 women and claims that this one was just lost among the shuffle. While this appears to be an ordinary group of people eating ice cream and playing music, it is actually a group of officers at the concentration camp Auschwitz during the Holocaust. This is Sheila Frederick, a flight attendant. She noticed that a terrified girl was accompanied by an older man, so she left a note in the bathroom on which the victim wrote that she needed help. She contacted the police, who saved her from a human trafficker. The Soviet Union actually used to airbrush people out of photos when they fell out of favor with the leadership. While this photo may appear to be of a little girl holding her younger sibling, it is actually of Lena Medina, the youngest girl to ever give birth, who had her son in Peru in 1939, after she was sexually assaulted at the age of 5. Creepy historical photos that will haunt your nightmares, Part 3. Back in the day, plague doctor outfits used to have extremely large noses, which held herbs and other nicely scented items which were believed to ward off the bad air which contained the sickness. The man who took this photo was Harvey Glatman, a serial killer in the 50s who posed as a professional photographer in order to lure models into his home. He then tied up, photographed, and strangled them, and was known as the Glamour Girl Slayer. Violet of Edinburgh was voted the scariest woman alive in 1882 and 1884. She was a part of a vampire group in the UK where its members would summon the dead and have to donate their blood in order to get in. This is the Beast of Jersey, who would break into homes and rape women and children. He was convicted of 13 counts of sexual assault, rape, and sodomy. This is Mrs. Shalafo, who faced poverty and was evicted from her apartment in 1948. She then had to sell her 4 children on the streets of Chicago. Creepy historical photos that will haunt your nightmares, Part 4. In the 1970s, a group believed that an alien spacecraft was coming to Earth in 1997. 36 members took their own life, believing that death was the only way that they could board the alien spaceship. The even more creepy website that the group used remains up to this day. This is serial killer Joe Methane. He would slay his victims and then strip their flesh. He would then mix it with pork and then sell it on the side of the road. This surveillance image shows a masked man driving the car of missing woman Kajavia Globe and using her card at a drive-thru ATM. He was proven to be her ex-boyfriend who killed her and shoved her body in a trash container. Dean Coral, nicknamed the Candyman because he gave young boys sweets from his family business, murdered, raped, and tortured over 28 young males. This photo was discovered showing a terrified young boy bent over on the ground with handcuffs on inside the Candyman's home. Normal looking photos that have a disturbing backstory, Part 21. This is known as the pale blue dot. This picture is a Voyager 1 photo, and the blue dot is Earth. On that tiny dot is everyone you've ever loved and every person that's ever lived. This photo was taken of Regina K by her killer. He was a truck driver who would pick up prostitutes, runaways, and hitchhikers, and he would rape, torture, and sometimes kill them. While this appears to be an ordinary group of friends having fun, it is actually a group of Nazi concentration camp officers at Auschwitz. The man on the left is Edmund Kemper, a 6'9" serial killer who murdered over 10 people. The man on the right is interviewing him. After the interview was finished, he clicked the panic button under the desk, but the guards didn't respond. Kemper noticed his panic and said, "If I wanted, I could screw your head off and place it on the table to greet the guards." They entered the room 30 minutes later.